Here we see the golden retriever performing his famous dance for treats.
I was in my room zoning out on Minecraft when a notification blinked onto my screen. It was from my next-door neighbor, Pam. Her name was changed in my contacts just in case drama ever turned into lawsuits. Being a high schooler, I didn't need that. Still, my first thought was obvious, another dog-sitting job. And sure enough, that's exactly what it was. It had been about 6 months since the last time she hired me. I heard through the neighborhood that her father had died about 5 months ago and she'd practically gone into hiding since. Lights on at strange hours. Curtains always drawn. People whispered. Her message started normally enough. "Hey Aiden, can you watch my lovely bundle of joy, the pug who can hardly breathe?" Roxy, I skimmed, expecting the usual instructions. But the last lines made something in my stomach sink. After Rich died, the house has become strange. But with my proper guidance, everything should go just fine. Hopefully. The keys are under the doormat. Enter the house between 3:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. and pick up the letter on the kitchen island. Leave immediately and read it once you're outside. The job is 8 days, November 1st, 8th. You will be paid well. Thanks, her saying, "You will be paid well" was already unusual. She had never said that before. But hey, money is money, and my curiosity was overpowering my nerves. At exactly 3:42 p.m., I walked across our quiet suburban street toward her house. The air felt heavier the closer I got. I lifted the doormat, found the key, and slipped inside. Even after all the years I'd been coming there, the place still looked impossibly clean, like no one actually lived in it. My entire house probably wasn't worth even one of the chandeliers hanging from her ceiling. I made my way to the kitchen, grabbed the loose-leaf note left on the marble island, and hurried back outside. Something in that house made the hairs on my neck stand up. I didn't even stop to pet Roxy, who was padding up behind me. Something told me to wait. I unfolded the note. And that was when the unease turned into something else, something cold. "Hello, Aiden. If you are reading this, it means you've already survived entering the house. Congratulations. This paper contains rules you must follow if you wish to avoid sending your soul to hell during your time watching Roxy. Normal feeding and letting out procedures still apply unless modified by the rules below. 1. You may only enter and leave the house between 7:27 and 8:56 and 12:35 and 2:04 p.m. 3:30 and 4:30 p.m. and 6:04 and 7:33 p.m. 2. If you are still in the house by 7:34, you must stay the night until 7:27. Sleep in the guest bedroom upstairs with the red mat in front of it. 3. Do not enter any rooms upstairs or even investigate any, even if noise or light may emanate from them. Only enter the guest room, and only then if it is 7, 3, 4, and later. 4. Especially do not enter father's room. Woo. Between 6:10 and 7:10 p.m., please light a fire in the fireplace in the main den that is next to the entrance, with some powder found in the urn next to the fireplace. I promise this isn't ashes. 6. If you cannot find Roxy in the house and you cannot recall letting her out, refer to the manual left on the grandfather clock in the den with the fireplace. It is imperative that you say a prayer before opening it. 7. Always leave the light above the kitchen island on, no matter what. If it goes off, turn to the light switch and flick it 3 times, saying the Latin phrase, Aduva nos Deus. If the light still doesn't come on immediately, leave the house and ignore any shadows or apparitions out of the corner of your eye without relocking the door and head home. You will still be paid for the day. 8. Let Roxy out whenever she wants to go. Don't force her out. If you hear her scratches on the door to want to be let out but you're with her, ignore them until they stop. If they stop and then start louder, yell back, and the phantom dog will no longer bother you. 9. If Roxy is outside and you hear her scratching the door to be let in, look through the side windows to see if she is there. Whatever you do, do not attempt to see if she is there through the door's windows. If she is not there, shut the curtains and wait 5 minutes. Repeat until she is there and let her inside. Make sure it is her, however, and not another dog. Especially not the black one with brown spots. Don't even look at that son of a bitch for too long. 10. Occasionally you may hear thumping upstairs or in the attic. Ignore it. It is just father pacing and protecting the house. Do not attempt to investigate or he will see you as an intruder. You will die. 11. Do not enter the attic or basement. Even if Roxy runs out of food, do not search for the bags in the basement. If she does run out, turn the lights off and back on and say the Latin phrase, Dominus nos benedicat nobis placere, and the food bag will be full after you step out of the room. 12. You may enjoy yourself by watching TV, playing billiards, shuffleboard, or whatever with your friends. You can hop in the pool too. However, if you are alone and want to play billiards, hold the blue and black cue with your right hand and say, I request an opponent, and the cue will play with you. Don't ask what the hell it is. It will always beat you. Do not attempt to win. Have fun, and please take good care of Roxy. I stared at the pages, my hands starting to tremble. I couldn't tell if it was the absurd amount of writing or the content itself that stunned me more. It read like a no-sleep story, something you'd scroll past at 3 a.m. Completely insane. Maybe she really was, just losing her mind from grief. I stuffed the note into my pocket and unlocked the door again. Roxy waddled toward me, tongue out snorting like she always did. She smothered me with slobbery kisses, but when I glanced toward the hallway mirror, my breath caught in my throat. In the reflection, Roxy had brown spots on her fur. She didn't. Not the real Roxy. I froze. In the mirror, Roxy's reflection stood perfectly still. Too still. Her mouth wasn't open. Her chest wasn't rising and falling in its usual wheezy rhythm. But the creature at my feet was panting happily, nudging against my leg. Same shape, same height, just different. I blinked once. The reflection didn't blink back. A cold pulse crawled across my spine. The rules. Rule 9. The black dog with brown spots. I didn't know if this counted, but I wasn't taking chances. Without looking down, I forced myself to step backward, not turning around, not speaking, just moving. The creature followed claws, clicking softly on the polished hardwood. I kept my eyes trained forward toward anything but the mirror. When I finally reached the kitchen, I grabbed the edge of the counter and let out a shaky breath. Roxy, I whispered. Come. A soft thump sounded near the back door. The real Roxy trotted in from the yard, her plain tan body unmistakable. No spots, no distorted reflection. I shifted my gaze slowly toward the mirror again. The spotted version was gone. The kitchen light above the island flickered just once. Then the shadows on the ceiling stretched an inch longer toward me. I flicked the switch 3 times immediately, my voice cracking as I tried to remember the Latin. Adi, adiuva. Nos Deus. The light steadied. The shadows shrank back to normal. I sank into one of the kitchen stools, breathing hard. This was real. The rules weren't a joke. This wasn't grief or paranoia, or some long, elaborate prank. Something in this house was aware of me, and it wanted me to slip up. Roxy climbed onto my lap, snorting comfortingly. I held her close, trying not to imagine what else was waiting behind the walls or under the floorboards. I watched the clock, like my life depended on it, because it did. At 7:27 p.m. exactly, I locked the door and practically sprinted upstairs. Roxy followed behind me, her tiny nails tapping in frantic rhythm. I found the guest room with the red mat in front of it and shoved myself inside, locking the door. The moment the lock clicked, something heavy moved down the hallway, slow, dragging, and then faster and faster. A fist slammed against the guest room door with a sound so loud I nearly dropped to the floor. Roxy growled, backing against the far wall. Another slam. Another. The wood splintered slightly around the hinge. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. Then, silence. A creak followed from farther down the hall, something pacing, crossing back and forth, a rhythm uneven, impatient. Rule 10. Father pacing the house. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink for more than a second at a time. I sat against the far wall until the first pale streak of 7:27 a.m. light touched the room. Only when the clock hit the exact minute did the noises upstairs stop, not fade, stop, as if someone turned the house back on. By the 3rd day, I had perfected my routine. Enter during the safe window feed, Roxy complete the chores, leave. I kept every light on, kept every curtain shut. That afternoon, I let Roxy outside to pee. She waddled happily into the yard, barking at birds. A minute later, scratching sounded behind me. At the door, scritch, scritch, scritch. But Roxy was still outside. I didn't turn around. I shut my eyes tight and raised my voice. Back. The scratching stopped instantly, but the air didn't lighten. Something exhaled behind me, long and low, like an animal trying to smell me without touching me. I swallowed and took a step to the side window. I forced myself to look out. Roxy was still sniffing around the grass. Good, good. I cracked the door and let her in. She ran straight to her water bowl. My heart almost slowed back to normal, until I noticed something outside. Dog prints, large ones, leading up to the back door, but none leading away. Roxy's food bag finally ran out on Wednesday. My stomach dropped. I stood in the kitchen for a solid minute, repeating the rule in my head. Lights off, lights on. Latin phrase. I flicked off the light. The room went black instantly. Something shifted in the corner, just enough sound for my brain to register it wasn't mechanical. I flicked the light back on, voice shaking. Dominus nos benedicat nobis placere. I stepped out of the kitchen. When I stepped back inside, the food bag was full, but the kitchen chair had moved 4 feet across the room, and the basement door, normally shut tight, was now cracked open an inch. A thin gray hand gripped the edge of it from inside. I backed out of the room so fast I slammed into the hallway wall. The hand slid slowly out of sight behind the door. No sound followed. No breathing. Just the door returning, inch by slow inch, until it clicked quietly shut. On the 7th day, I almost forgot the fireplace rule. Almost. At 6:1 p.m., I sprinted into the den and grabbed the urn. The powder inside was pale and grainy, not ash like the letter said. I sprinkled it into the firewood and lit a match. The flames erupted instantly, too big, too bright. The fire cracked upward like something breathing through it. The shadows on the walls twisted. At first, I thought it was just the firelight. Then one shadow stepped forward. A silhouette of a man, tall shoulders, hunched head, tilted sharply to one side like a broken marionette. He stood directly behind me. I didn't dare turn around. His reflection appeared in the fireplace glass. His face was wrong, like someone stretched old skin over a skull that didn't fit it. His jaw hung open, loose and trembling, and he whispered something I could barely hear. "Get out." I squeezed my eyes shut. Then the fire roared upward, engulfing the reflection. When I opened my eyes, the shadow was gone, but the smell of old cologne lingered behind me. The last day should have been easy. Get in, feed Roxy, leave, never return. But around 1:14 p.m., I heard something I wasn't prepared for. A voice, a deep one, coming from upstairs. "Aiden." I froze mid-step. Roxy stiffened beside me. "Help. Roxy is hurt. Come to Father's room." My blood ran cold. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The voice came again, louder, now scraping along the floorboards like it was dragging itself toward the staircase. "Come, now." Then the door to Father's room creaked open. A long white finger curled around the frame. Roxy whimpered and hid behind my leg. I bolted. I grabbed Roxy, sprinted down the hallway, fumbled with the lock, and threw myself out of the house at exactly 1:58 p.m., still within the safe window. I didn't look back. I didn't lock the door. I didn't even breathe until I reached my own porch. From across the street, Pam's upstairs curtains shifted. Something tall and thin stood behind them, watching me. Pam paid me a week later, more than she ever had. She thanked me, said everything went fine, and that the house had been calmer while I was there. I blocked her number that same night. Sometimes when I'm lying awake late at night, I hear it. A soft scratching on my front door. Scritch, scritch, scritch. And sometimes, a wet, wheezing breath underneath it. I never answer. But sometimes I think about Roxy, the real one. And I wonder, did she ever make it out of that house, or did I bring the wrong dog home? If you've ever dog sat for anyone you know, it's usually easy money feed. The dogs sit on their couch, raid their pantry, repeat. That's how it was whenever I watched my aunt's little Havanese Luna. She barely made noise, barely moved, and honestly barely cared whether I existed. 2 feedings a day, a few minutes in the backyard, and she'd curl up like a stuffed toy until morning. That was the dream job. But then came the Hollands, my worst job, and the last one I ever took. Their house sat deep in the woods, buried on 5 acres of dense, light-eating forest. The kind of property where the world feels muffled, like even the wind refuses to speak too loudly. Their home looked more like a high-end museum than a place human beings were supposed to live. Flat black walls, sharp corners, too many windows. Cold, watchful. I met Mrs. Holland a week before the job. She was elegant, in a stiff, rehearsed kind of way. Polished, precise, like she was carved rather than born. Her eyes had this unsettling intensity, the kind that made you feel examined before you even said hello. Mr. Holland wasn't there. Apparently he traveled often. She told me she'd be at a conference for 4 days. They needed someone to stay in the house and watch their dog King. King was a massive old German shepherd, slow, silent, and unnervingly obedient. When I first met him, he didn't bark or growl. He didn't even acknowledge the treat I tried to give him. He just stared past me like he was watching something I couldn't see. Mrs. Holland gave me rules, not instructions rules. King's food had to be measured to the exact gram. The thermostat was to stay at 70 degrees. The blinds in the living room had a bizarre schedule: closed during the day, opened only slightly at sunset, closed again at 9 p.m. on the dot. Then she gave me rules about me. I was to stay only in the guest suite, on the east wing. Her eyes had this unsettling intensity, the kind that made you feel examined before you even said hello. Mr. Holland wasn't there. Apparently he traveled often. She told me she'd be at a conference for 4 days. They needed someone to stay in the house and watch their dog King. King was a massive old German shepherd, slow, silent, and unnervingly obedient. When I first met him, he didn't bark or growl. He didn't even acknowledge the treat I tried to give him. Her eyes had this unsettling intensity, the kind that made you feel examined before you even said hello. Mr. Holland wasn't there. Apparently he traveled often. She told me she'd be at a conference for 4 days. They needed someone to stay in the house and watch their dog King. King was a massive old German shepherd, slow, silent, and unnervingly obedient. When I first met him, he didn't bark or growl. He didn't even acknowledge the treat I tried to give him. I tried to ignore it, ate some pizza, watched a movie, and eventually headed to the guest suite around 1 a.m. King slept outside my door just like the Hollands told me he would. I figured it was cute old dog guarding the new guy. But the moment I walked past him toward the sliding patio doors, something hit me. A scent. Cologne. Strong, expensive, and fresh. The same exact scent Mr. Holland had been wearing when I'd met his wife. I froze. They were 3 states away. That scent shouldn't have been anywhere near me. I told myself it was lingering from a jacket or from the house itself. But it wasn't stale, it was recent. Like someone had just walked through the room minutes before I entered it. I stepped back into the hall. King didn't move. The house didn't breathe. Something felt wrong. I checked the front door. Dead bolted. I checked the back patio. Locked. Every window I passed was shut tight. Nothing explained the scent. But then I saw the mudroom light was on. It had been off earlier. It ran on a motion sensor. 30 minutes before I had watched it flick off after coming in from unpacking my stuff. Now it glowed faint yellow at the end of the hall. My stomach dropped. Still telling myself it was a glitch, I walked toward the mudroom. Everything was untouched. Shoes lined up perfectly, coats hung with robotic precision. I went to switch off the light manually, but then I saw something in the mirror, mounted on the far wall. A shape. A shift of darkness behind me, near the guest suite door, followed by the unmistakable metallic click of a door latch. I spun around. The hallway was empty. King was standing now, body tense, staring down the hall. He hadn't made a sound, but then slowly he exhaled. Not a growl, not a whine. A deep, heavy, almost human sigh, like he already knew exactly what was happening and hated it. I moved toward the foyer. The cold air felt electrified. The entire house felt like it was holding its breath. And then I reached the basement door. Earlier that day, the bolt had been firmly locked in place. Mrs. Holland had emphasized it must remain locked. Now the bolt was undone, and right beside it, faint but fresh, was a small scratch in the metal, as if someone had yanked the bolt back too quickly and scraped the housing in the process. That's when the truth began to hit me, not like a sudden shock, but like a slow, unwrapping dread. Someone had been in that basement. Someone had come out, and someone had been watching me. Whether it was Mr. Holland or someone else, I didn't know yet, but the house did, and it wasn't hiding it anymore. The deeper I was pulled into that house, the more it felt like something was observing me, not through superstition, but through calculation. And I knew exactly where to look. The security console. The thing Mrs. Holland had warned me never to touch. I crossed the living room, forcing my steps to stay calm, deliberate. The console was nestled next to the fireplace, a cluster of black boxes and thin LED strips. The main monitor looked dead, just a reflective sheet of glass. But at the bottom of the processor tower, I noticed a tiny green LED, pulsing alive, transmitting. The cameras were not off. They had never been off. And then I saw the one that was meant to stay hidden. A tiny dome camera, barely big enough to notice, tucked behind a decorative grate above the bookshelf. Positioned perfectly to watch the foyer, the living room, the basement door, and me. The Hollands had lied. Or worse, one of them had returned. My skin crawled as a single possibility rose to the surface. I wasn't there to watch the dog. I was the one being watched. The house felt colder than before, and my instincts screamed that whoever had slipped from the basement and locked a door, whoever smelled like Mr. Holland, was still there. Still hiding. Still watching me react. I forced myself to breathe evenly, to turn my back to the console, as though none of this unsettled me. Panic would only tell the watcher I had figured it out. I needed to get out. Fast, but quietly. I walked to the guest suite, like everything was normal. King followed, silent, his claws tapping faintly on the floor. He watched me with these old, sad eyes, as if he knew exactly what was happening and had seen it happen before. I whispered, "Bedtime, big guy," and stepped inside. The second the door clicked shut, I locked it and moved fast. My only escape path was the sliding glass door that led to the small patio, one of the few places not covered by a visible camera. I grabbed my essentials, wallet, phone, keys. No bag, no noise. I slid the latch up slowly, the metal grinding against itself loud enough to feel like a scream in the silent house. I cracked the door open. Then I heard its soft paw steps behind me. King. He had followed me inside, standing a few feet away, head lowered, eyes pleading. He didn't bark, didn't whine. Just looked at me like leaving him behind was the worst betrayal imaginable. His entire body trembled ever so slightly, like he knew what happened to anyone who tried to leave without permission. I knelt down and put a hand on his collar. "I'm sorry, boy," I whispered, voice cracking. "I can't take you with me." He nudged my wrist with his nose, once, twice, hard enough that it hurt. He wanted me to stay, or wanted to follow. Or maybe he just didn't want to be left alone with whatever lived in that house. But I couldn't risk the noise of a 100-pound dog climbing out a window. I squeezed his fur one last time. "I'm sorry," I repeated, and stepped through the gap. He let out the quietest whimper I've ever heard. Then I shut the door. I didn't look back. I ran. Across the silent lawn, past the skeletal trees, through the swallowing darkness. My footsteps sounded too loud, like the woods themselves were amplifying my escape. I burst onto the gravel driveway, dove into my car, and sped down the long forest road without daring a glance in the rearview mirror. Only when the trees thinned and the highway lights hit my windshield did my lungs finally empty in one ragged exhale. But the fear didn't stop. I pulled into a gas station, a bright, harsh oasis of buzzing fluorescence, and sat there shaking. My hands felt numb. My skin felt wrong, like the house had left fingerprints on me. My mind screamed to call the police. But what would I say? I smelled cologne and saw a scratch on a door. They told me the cameras were off, but a green light blinked. I think one of them was hiding in the house. They'd tell me I was paranoid or overtired or imagining things. I sat there staring at my phone. Then it buzzed. A new text from an unknown number. My blood went cold. "You left him. King is scared. He'll be lonely now." The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. I had left the house at 2:12 a.m. 5 minutes. Whoever was watching had seen me climb out the window, seen me leave the old dog behind, and they had my number. They were still watching. Still playing. I put the phone down like it was radioactive. For 2 days I heard nothing. I didn't dare message the Hollands, didn't dare ask about King. Finally, on Sunday morning, I sent a simple, sterile text. "Family emergency. Had to leave early. King has food and water." No reply. But the next morning, the payment for the full 4 days hit my bank account. No message. Just money. Like they were paying for silence. or rewarding a performance in a game I never agreed to play. I never heard from the Hollands again. But I still think about King, his quiet plea, the resigned way he sighed at shadows only he understood. I think about the basement door, the cameras, the fresh cologne, the way the house seemed to pulse with presence. And sometimes late at night when a door clicks shut behind me with no breeze to explain it, I remember that gas station text glowing on my screen like an accusation. You left him. I still check every smoke detector, every vent, every grate in the places I stay. I still feel watched in unfamiliar rooms. And sometimes when I lie awake in the dark, I can almost imagine those hidden cameras, those unseen lenses, focused on me the way they were, that night, quiet, patient, hungry. Because the horror wasn't that someone was in the house. The horror was that they wanted me to know in their own sick, silent way, and that they never stopped watching. I took on a dog-sitting job for a family called the Fosters. They lived in a quaint, historic part of town, a quiet neighborhood filled with old lamps, cobblestone sidewalks, and houses that looked like they'd survived a century of stories. Their home was a gorgeous Victorian, 3 stories tall, wrapped in a wide porch, and framed by a thick, cozy garden bursting with flowers and old oak branches. It felt warm, lived in, and safe. To complete their dog was a 3-year-old beagle named Gus. He had that classic beagle personality, goofy, loud, constantly sniffing everything, and always convinced he was starving no matter how much he ate. The moment I walked through the door, he bounded toward me with an excited howl, tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled. His cheerful energy was contagious, and for the first time in a long while, a dog-sitting job actually felt comforting. Their instructions were simple: feed Gus twice a day, walk him twice a day, let him sleep on the bed, he insisted, they said with a smile. The only strange thing was a small detail Mrs. Foster mentioned as I was leaving. Gus has a thing about his collars, dear, she said, adjusting the bright red bandana he was wearing. He has 2. The red one is his outside collar, the black one is his inside collar. Please always make sure he wears the black one when he's inside. He just feels safer. It's a silly routine, but he gets anxious if it's wrong. I thought it was quirky, an old couple indulging their dog's neuroses. The black collar was hanging on a hook next to the leash in the mudroom. It was an old, simple black nylon collar, worn soft with no tags. I nodded, filed the information under harmless eccentricities, and waved them off. The first few days were idyllic. Gus was a blast. We had long walks, and he'd snooze on the end of the guest bed at night, snoring loudly. I was enjoying the change of pace and the beautiful, creaky old house. The anxiety started subtly on the 4th night. I was watching a documentary in the massive, dimly lit living room on the ground floor. Gus was asleep on the plush rug beside me, wearing his inside black collar. Around 10 p.m., I needed to go upstairs to the 3rd floor guest room to grab a charger. I got up, and Gus followed me to the base of the grand curving staircase. He stopped there. This wasn't unusual. Gus sometimes waited at the bottom, but this time he was whining. A low, anxious, continuous sound. Come on, buddy, I whispered. Just up and down. He sat down firmly, head cocked, and the low whine got a little louder. I noticed his eyes weren't looking at me. They were fixed halfway up the staircase where the shadows pooled thickest. I shrugged it off, as him being lazy, maybe needing the outside one last time. I went up alone. The house was full of the quiet sounds of an old structure, creaks, groans. The gentle ticking of the house settling. It was ambient, not scary. I reached the 3rd floor, which had a long carpeted hall. My room was at the very end. I was halfway down the hall when I felt it. The unmistakable, distinct pressure of a weight against my calf, followed by the soft, rhythmic thump-thump of a tail. I froze. Gus was downstairs. I had left him at the bottom of the staircase whining. I slowly looked down. Nothing. The carpet was clear. I felt a sudden, sharp prickle of cold skin across my arms. I started to tell myself it was just the old house playing tricks on me, the carpet texture, my clothes. But as I took a tentative step, I felt the phantom pressure again, a brief light brushing against my left leg, a weight that shouldn't have been there. It felt exactly like a small dog walking right beside me. I sprinted the rest of the way to the room, grabbed the charger, and practically flew back down the stairs. Gus was exactly where I had left him, at the bottom of the stairs. His whining stopped the moment he saw me. He wagged his tail happily, the red bandana weight black collar around his neck. But when I reached the bottom step, and Gus was right there snuffling my hand, I looked closely at his collar. It was the simple worn black nylon one, exactly as it should be, except I could swear for a fraction of a second that the black collar looked thicker, almost doubled up, as if he was wearing the black collar, and right underneath it, hidden by its width, was another almost identical black collar. A second collar. I told myself I was tired, that the light had been playing tricks. The idea of a second collar, a hidden one, was too ridiculous. Gus was a happy, dopey beagle. I was projecting the paranoia from the Holland job onto a gentle, aging dog, but I couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next 2 days, I started to observe Gus with a clinical, disturbing intensity. His energy levels were erratic. Sometimes he was the picture of canine joy, leaping and bounding on our walks. Other times, he would lie motionless for hours, staring at a blank wall, his breathing shallow, his big brown eyes utterly empty. It was almost like a complete personality swap. And he never ever went upstairs. He would sit at the base of the staircase, guarding it with the solemnity of a sentinel. I decided to test the collar. It was purely for my own sanity. I would take the collar off, clean it, and prove there was nothing under it. It was late morning. Gus had just come in from his morning walk and was happily chewing on a bone in the sunny living room. I knelt beside him, gave him a couple of distracting scratches, and slipped my fingers under the black nylon. "Easy, boy," I murmured, "just for a second." The second my fingers found the buckle, Gus's entire body went rigid. The chewing stopped instantly. The low, contented growl of a chewing dog vanished. He stood up, all 30 pounds of him tense and coiled, and let out a sound that I had never heard from him before, or any beagle for that matter. It wasn't a bark. It was a guttural warning snarl, a sound scraped raw from the back of his throat, deep and threatening, nothing like the comical howl beagles are known for. It was the sound of an animal giving a last desperate threat. I drew my hand back instantly, heart slamming against my ribs. Gus didn't lunge, but his teeth were bared wet with saliva and bone fragments, his lips pulled back to expose a row of sharp, unsettling whiteness. Their instructions were simple: feed Gus twice a day, walk him twice a day, let him sleep on the bed, he insisted, they said with a smile. The only strange thing was a small detail Mrs. Foster mentioned as I was leaving. "Gus has a thing about his collars, dear," she said, adjusting the bright red bandana he was wearing. "He has two. The red one is his outside collar, the black one is his inside collar. Please always make sure he wears the black one when he's inside." "Easy, boy," I murmured, "just for a second." The second my fingers found the buckle, Gus's entire body went rigid. The chewing stopped instantly. The low, contented growl of a chewing dog vanished. He stood up, all 30 pounds of him tense and coiled, and let out a sound that I had never heard from him before, or any beagle for that matter. It wasn't a bark. His focus was entirely on my hands, my intention to touch the collar. I sat back on the floor, my palms sweating. Okay, buddy. Sorry." He held the pose for another agonizing minute, his eyes burning into mine before slowly, cautiously, he relaxed and began to chew again. But the bone no longer made a happy sound. It was the tense, grinding noise of a dog on guard duty. That was the line. Why would an old couple use a dog sitter as an unwitting warden? What were they protecting, and from whom? The phantom weight on the stairs, the forced rules, the aggression. It all pointed to something hidden, something suppressed. That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room. I slept on the living room sofa, keeping a low light on the massive beagle curled up on the rug nearby. I had to know. The fear of not knowing was now greater than the fear of Gus's reaction. There were tiny dried flakes, the color of old blood or dark rust, pressed deep into the fibers near the buckle. And as I watched Gus's neck move, the collar did seem to ride up just a fraction, revealing the faintest, thinnest line of gray fabric underneath. I spent the rest of the day in a rising tide of paranoia. The second collar. It was a thin, ratty gray webbing, almost completely hidden by the black one. It was tight, cinched firmly against his throat. It had one single small circular tag, dull silver from age and wear. I carefully lifted the thin gray material and flipped the tag over. The light from the living room lamp glinted off the etched metal. It wasn't a name. It wasn't an address or a phone number. It was a single 3-letter word, carved with a stark, unsettling finality: bark. Around 4 a.m., Gus shifted into a deep REM sleep, his legs twitching, a soft, sleepy woof escaping his lips. It was now or never. I moved with excruciating slowness. I held my breath, my hands shaking so badly that the task of finding the small, cold metal buckle felt impossible. Finally, I got my thumb under the tongue, and with a soft, barely audible click, the black collar released. Gus didn't stir. I gently, so gently, slipped the black nylon away from his thick neck. And there it was. The gray collar, the one cinched tight underneath, was the control mechanism for Bark, the dog that had been through something terrible, the one who wasn't allowed to exist, the one whose trauma they were trying to muzzle and hide. The blood stains on the inside of the black collar were suddenly horrifying, perhaps from where the collar chafed a previous wound or perhaps where Bark had been forced into submission. The phantom dog I felt upstairs wasn't a ghost. Around 4 a.m., Gus shifted into a deep REM sleep, his legs twitching, a soft, sleepy woof escaping his lips. It was now or never. I moved with excruciating slowness. I held my breath, my hands shaking so badly that the task of finding the small cold metal buckle felt impossible. Finally, I got my thumb under the tongue, and with a soft, barely audible click, the black collar released. Gus didn't stir. I gently, so gently, slipped the black nylon away from his thick neck. And there it was. He didn't look mad. He looked deeply, profoundly sad, his eyes meeting mine with a strange, knowing intelligence that no beagle should possess. It was as if Bark had briefly surfaced, recognized me as the one who knew the truth, and then retreated, suppressed by the symbolic weight of the black collar. I sat upright on the sofa, clutching my knees, unable to move. I stayed like that until the cold light of dawn filtered through the curtains, never once taking my eyes off the quiet, sleeping form of the dog. When it was light enough, I forced myself to go back up to the third-floor guest room. I needed to pack. I had 2 weeks of sitting left, but there was no way I could stay. As I walked down the long, empty corridor of the third floor, I heard it again, faint, rhythmic, and coming from the walls near my room, the same place where I'd felt the phantom weight a few nights ago. It sounded like a desperate animal trapped inside the drywall. But it was too high up for a rodent. It sounded heavy, determined. I went to the wall opposite the door. There was a huge antique mahogany wardrobe, one of those pieces of furniture that looked like it had been there for a century. I put my ear against the wood. The scratching was coming from directly behind it. My adrenaline spiked. With a monumental effort, I gripped the side of the heavy cabinet and pulled. It scraped against the old floorboards, moving just an inch enough to give me a sliver of darkness to peer into. The drywall behind the wardrobe was intact. No hidden door, no hole. But the pale gray paint was scored. Not 1 or 2 marks, but a dense, frantic cluster of deep, dark, parallel gashes. They were too low for a person, and too uniform for a simple scratch. They were the marks of claws dug in deep and wide. They stopped abruptly at the floor and then continued higher up to the ceiling. It wasn't a sound in the walls. The scratching was on the surface of the wall behind the wardrobe, and the marks were old, painted over once, maybe twice, but still visible beneath the newest coat. Someone or something had been desperately trying to claw its way out of that narrow space, and the Fosters had simply covered the evidence with the oldest, heaviest piece of furniture they owned. The dog named Bark wasn't just suppressed. He was a terror that had once been locked away and had desperately tried to escape the room. I packed my bag in a silent blur. I left enough food and water for Gus for 3 more days, along with a note saying I had a sudden medical emergency and was forced to leave. I never looked at Gus again as I walked out, his black collar sitting perfectly in place. 2 weeks later, the Fosters wired me the full payment and a note. "So sorry you had to leave. Gus missed you, but he was a perfect angel as always. We look forward to seeing you again." I didn't answer. I still think about that tiny silver tag and the word etched onto it. I think about the dog who had a name that was a command, and the house that had a hidden room and a wardrobe that covered up the sound of an animal's desperation. The true horror of the Foster's house wasn't the haunting. It was the chilling clinical ability of people to surgically remove a creature's true self, leaving behind a perfectly fabricated, obedient shell, and knowing that the gray collar and the terror it represented was still cinched tight beneath the red bandana.